But if you look at union coverage, and I'm using a term that the Center for Economic and Policy Research used in rich countries, advanced industrial democracies, if you will. The union is a union coverage rate. This isn't membership, this is coverage in the workforce. And in some countries like France, you have coverage that's 90%, right? But you may have a membership rate that's closer to 9%. So coverage does not equal membership. In the US, coverage is a little bit higher, but not too much higher than membership across all states. But you can see we're the smallest in terms of union representation country among these selected countries. And I just picked through to fit on one graph a number of these countries to show the variation that exists in coverage. Why have unions declined? There are several hypotheses. One is that of structural change, globalization, technology, shifting occupations, all of these factors may contribute to the decline of unionization, the shifting of jobs overseas because of high wages in the US. I mean, I've been in management consultant. I've sit at the table with management leaders who have been, or they're getting ready to negotiate a contract in the manufacturing sector. And they are under tremendous pressure from their boards to reduce labor costs. Tremendous pressure. And members of their board are saying things such as, why don't we just shut down all of our manufacturing plants in North America and move them to Mexico and China? Let's get out of the United States, get away from the auto workers, get away from the steel workers, whatever the case might be. And we'll be better off. And the management people sitting in that room have had, including the president of North American divisions and the vice presidents of labor relations, have tried to fend off that kind of an attack. But it's very real. And it's not just higher labor costs per se. They don't want to have to deal with the day-to-day transaction costs of having a union. They don't have to deal with the culture of a union, which they think is counterproductive. It isn't just about the work rules, mind you. It's about the culture of the people that have grown up and worked in a unionized environment. Yes, Dave.
But have you put all that into context when you say, what, 7% of the workforce is unionized? So you're talking about give back salaries, but you're not talking about most workers are not unionized. So it's sort of a fallacious argument that this kind of structure is going to be hurting us when most of these people don't have workers who are unionized.
I think that's the argument. If I had to make the argument, it's an argument that's often made about China versus the US. You want to take whatever resources you have at the margin and put them into capital, or put it into other people's wages, not the wage bill of your typical worker. And that brings, this is why it's called, a race to the bottom.
But that totally ignores, for example, union wages in Germany in automotive is much higher than the US. And productivity and profits are much higher in Germany than in the US. So driving labor costs down are not in and of itself a solution for greater profitability.
I agree with you.
Okay.
I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that from their perspective, it's easier to cut than it is to raise productivity. So you cut your labor bill. And also I would say there's another factor that's different between European countries and us. They have certain costs on their liability sheet that we have certain costs on our liability sheet that they don't have. Healthcare being one of them. And so when the shareholders look at that cost, they say, we want that off our liability sheets. Yeah, go ahead.
But that's, again, fallacious only because they get healthcare as part of the public sector and they have higher tax rates. So it's sort of, anyway. We'll have a different conversation.
Yeah,
I don't want to derail your talk.
Yeah, don't expect there to be a whole lot of rationality.
Oh, okay.
No, I was just going to say that even if you look at Costco and Walmart, that Costco pays about 3 times as much in wages, and they get more productivity per worker hour,
Yes.
and per worker dollar, dollar spent on labor, than Sam's Club or anything. So, I mean, even looking at someplace where they can't offshore, the numbers just don't hold up, that it decreases profits.
Yes. Clearly, I mean, we can cite examples of those kinds of situations on both sides, but this is, an attempt to explain general economic factors as one of the reasons for the change. Technology is a different one, shift in occupations is another. The growth in occupations has been in traditionally non-union jobs. These are harder to penetrate. There's been more growth in the South and in non-right-to-work states, in right-to-work states than there has been in other parts of the United States. All of these things are contributors. I think I'm going to get to the point both of you are trying to make in a second. A second hypothesis is the public and worker attitudes. There are many people out there that will say it's not just a question of there's an inadequate supply of unions, that there's an inadequate worker demand for unions. That people, you look at these polls, and Peter Hart's done them, Peter Hart and Associates have done polls, and they find that a majority of workers polled would say that if they had a chance to vote for union representation, they would vote for union representation. What detractors of that argument say is that's not the right way to put the question. If that, after all the costs and benefits are put to you, after all the risks are put to you, then what are you going to do? And if there's opposition to you, and if there's fear instilled in you, how much risk are you willing to take to be for that union? It harkens back to the 1930s, which was a very disadvantageous time to try and fight for unions. I mean, people got bloodied in trying to form unions. And they will say, these general kind of superficial polls don't really tell you about the true demand that people have and the risks they're willing to take for a union, because it is very risky to form a union in this country. Don't have any mistakes about that. I mean, that employer will hire an anti-union consultant, and that consultant will tell you every legal device and take you right up to the law, and in fact may encourage you to step across that line and say, this is what you can do to keep a union out of this place. And basically it all boils down to this proposition: put the fear of God into them. Yes?
It seems like that tactic contradicts the original position, which was that workers don't want unions. I mean, if workers aren't in favor of unions, a position they take, why do you have to do so much fighting?
Well, remember,
the unions?
that's a generalization. There are going to be many parts of the workplace in which unions can get some traction, and you'll have a nascent or beginning union organizing campaign. It's when management sees that they will say, we'll bring in these consultants and they'll help us wage a campaign. It's just, we're not going to take any chances. We're not going to, go ahead.
I understand that, but what you said at first, I thought, I may be mistaken, is that one of the prevailing opinions is that workers don't really want unions. I mean, outside of the poll, that the point.
No, that's what people who say there's not really much of a real demand for unions say. That you can't look at that poll number and say that's the real demand for unions.
Yeah, but if they're right, if there is no real demand for you, why all this fighting to prevent them?
Because we don't want a union any place. Okay? You think, go try and unionize one of the transplants. What percentage of the auto industry is unionized?
It used to be 100%, now it's half.
Maybe less than
Less
half,
than
right?
half.
And you go to the parts, it's probably what, 20,
Absolutely.
25%? No successful attempt to organize the plants. Try and organize the plants, the transplants in the auto industry, and see if you meet any management opposition. That's all I can tell you. They will fight tooth and nail. even though private sector union representation is 6.9%. Tooth and nail. This brings up the point of employer opposition, and this is what many labor scholars and other observers of the situation say is the real reason why you've seen a decline in unionization. It's because all of these things together heighten and more sophisticated employer opposition, structural changes, fear of job loss, real fear of economic insecurity, the real presence of economic insecurity. All these things have created a perfect storm.
You left out regulatory frames, all your right to work states.
That would be the right to work laws.
But I mean, once you have it a law, you don't need employer opposition, then you have a legal restriction.
Now, the argument here, though, also is, David, is that you have a legal framework that encourages employer opposition and imposes very few penalties on employers for vigorously opposing unions and for even violating the law. And we'll talk about that in a second. So it's the same kind of argument. So structural changes, union membership fell in most countries, but the losses varied substantially. These differences across countries exposed to similar levels of globalization and technological change, along the point you made with Germany, suggest these factors do not mechanically determine levels of unionization. And indeed, you look at the change in union coverage over this time period, you can see the differences across countries. In New Zealand, because there was a change in law, in Britain because there was a change in law, in the US because there's been a crystallization of employer opposition, among other things. You've seen a reduction in union representation coverage over this time period. But there's tremendous variation across countries. In other words, if you can go back a couple of slides, what research will probably tell you is that these factors, exogenous factors, may explain 25% of the decline. These factors probably explain much less, and that the bulk of the decline is attributed to the legal environment, et cetera, which has encouraged employer opposition. And indeed, you know, there's a huge industry out there of employers, of law firms that, you know, they just feed off this. I remember several years ago when I was working on a book on union finances, I was called in by the law firm of Aiken, Grump, Strauss in Washington. You know, Bob Strauss, former head of the Democratic National Party. On my way out of the elevator to the meeting, I bump in and have a few words with Vernon Jordan, a friend of Bill Clinton's, former head of, I think, the National Urban League. And I go in there, and you want to know why they wanted me there? They were hired by a retail food chain to think of ways to apply the RICO laws to the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. And they wanted to know, by looking at the LM2 forms, the financial forms that unions file, what kind of corruption they can find. And I said, well, you've got to be very, very clever to look at those things and find any corruption. Most of the corruption that you're going to find in unions is probably under the table, not on these books. And then we had a little discussion. They saying, well, how much corruption do you think there is in unions? And I said, not nearly as much, to go to your point, as there is in business. Because there isn't the money. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. There isn't nearly the money to do it. Union boss, wealthy union leaders, that is one of the biggest canards that's put out there that I've ever seen. But to move ahead, there has been a tremendous decline. I want to go ahead to employer opposition, the legal framework. There's been a tremendous decline in consent elections. And it used to be when most elections to certify a union as a bargaining representative took place, the employer agreed with the union as to the scope of the bargaining unit, they had the election. That occurs rarely today. Most of the time you find employers fighting the union tooth and nail from the get-go over the shape and composition of the bargaining unit, to unfair labor practices, whatever the case might be. Rise in union avoidance consulting. This has a reactive element, which I've been talking about. You're presented with a union organizing campaign, you react by bringing in the consultants. There's a preventive aspect to it, in that a lot of employers will adopt what I'll call positive employee relations programs to keep unions out. It's a union substitution effect. And this is a quote from Jack Barbash, who wrote in 1948. He was a labor scholar at the University of Wisconsin, very prominent, who wrote a book on unions in action. That was the title of it that year. No political democracy has offered a more hostile environment to unionism than has the United States. It's a very, very union-unfriendly environment. The right to unionize and bargain collectively, it's part of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 23, and it's part of 3 protocols or conventions promulgated by the International Labor Organization, which was created in 1919. It's one of the few, if not the only, survivor of the League of Nations that was absorbed in the UN in the 1940s. But it has a freedom of association and right to organize protocol, a right to organize and collective bargaining protocol, and the U.S. has not ratified either one of them. Yes?
Parenthetically, you might point out that the U.S. is also one of the only industrialized countries without a labor party in the political environment, which is very important for everything else.
And that's been studied. You know, the countries that tend to have, they're called social democratic countries. They tend to have a labor party. They have the highest rates of unionization. We have, I might say, to piggyback on that, Dave, we have a very, very conservative labor movement in the United States. It's ideologically very conservative. It's capitalistic, it's democratic, it works within the system, it's eschewed for many years third-party developments. In the main, you can always pick out exceptions to that, but that's sort of the status quo. And this is from Freedom House in the 2010 report on labor rights across the globe about the United States. Their comments: management has used a variety of tactics to forestall unionization and has shown a willingness to violate labor law that would result in the defeat of a union campaign to gain recognition. When found guilty of violations, companies are often given slap on the wrist penalties. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But your rights under the National Labor Relations Act, they're pretty simply stated. You have the right to form, join, or assist a union. You have the right to choose representatives to bargain on your behalf. You have the right to act with other employees for your protection. And you can choose not to engage in these protected rights. So there is this qualifier there. You don't have to support the union. You don't have to vote for the union. And you don't have to participate in the union. And that's important when it comes to the right to work debate, about what the true freedoms are in the workplace. So what happens if you're fired? Okay, let's say Dave and Amy here, they're the 2 troublemakers in class. I know they're going to unionize this group. So they're going to try and unionize this group, and I'm the instructor. I say, I got to get them out of here. They're contaminating everything. They'll have Frank signing up, and everybody. They'll have Steve signing up. They'll have Mark Crewman joining the union, and the whole world will fall apart. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to manufacture a reason to fire you.
You don't need a reason to fire me.
No, but I'm going to manufacture one anyway. I'm going to say you're insubordinate, I'm going to terminate you for that, and you're gone. And you say, oh, that's unfair. I don't care. You think I really care? So you file a complaint are charged with the regional director of the National Labor Relations Board. The regional director investigates it to see if it should, a formal complaint should be made. Then the regional director prosecutes the complaint before the administrative law judge. The administrative law judge decides, then you appeal to the 5-person whenever it has a full contingent, NLRB. And if they rule against the company may appeal it to the courts. That can take 2-3 years.
And there's no punitive damages?
No.
You have to have shown that you have attempted to mitigate their level of damage, because I was fired twice for leading union organizing drives, and in the 1970s, one of the first was Jackson Lewis as anti-union firm, and I got to negotiate my settlement with Lewis himself.
Mm-hmm. The best you can get is reinstatement with the back pay. Some years down the road, when you may not even want the job, and if you worked and you have to apply for it, you have to, seek work during this time period. You just can't not seek work. But whatever pay you've gotten while you're working, you have to deduct from the back pay you'll get. So that's the penalty. And so it's alleged that there are inadequacies and protections that are provided by the Act and the Board itself, the lack of injunctive relief, no compensatory damages, lengthy decision-making process. I think it takes the median time it takes to get a decision from the National Labor Relations Board today is 983 days in unfair labor practice cases. 983 days, do the math, 3 years. Lengthy decision-making process. Now, wouldn't it be nice to say, I as an employee was fired, I can go to court, and they can enjoin that and reinstate me until they have the full hearing and determine whether or not the employer was justified in the discharge?
Would be nice.
It would be nice, but that's not the way it exists right now. And so, why the decline matters. There's a shrinking middle class. We're all familiar with this. The top 1% of the wage earners in the United States, we've heard a lot about 1%ers. Between 1979 and 2007, garnered 59% of the increase in wages. Of the increase. The top 1/10 of 1% garnered 36% of the increase.
Statistic is the top 49 earners have a combined income equal to the bottom 19 million.
That's right.
Top 49 earners, not wealth, not dividends, earned income. The top 49 in 2010 earned as much as the bottom 19 million.
That's right. So we've seen a tremendous increase in inequality. In the past decade, median family income actually declined. In the United States, does anybody want to take a guess at what the poverty rate is today in the United States? And poverty is defined as somebody who makes less than 1/2 of the median income. Anybody want to guess?
25%?
It's close to 25% for children.
Right.
For adults, it's for all citizens, it's over 17%. We stand at the top of the advanced industrial democracy in terms of that. Pardon?
Nice to be first at something.
Yeah. But rising income inequality, stagnant wages, dwindling benefits, and declining voice. Those are some of the consequences. It's why it matters. A civil rights proposal. This is a book I would encourage everybody to read. It just came out a couple of months ago. You may have seen it already. It's by Richard Kallenberg and Mosh Margaret. It's called Why Labor Organizing Should Be a Civil Right. And they've got a proposal in here to make labor organizing a right protected by the 1991 Civil Rights Act. It's a very interesting proposal. It's a much different kind of a proposal than you see in the Employee Free Choice Act. And just by way of background, one of the reasons why they proposed this is they don't think the Employee Free Choice Act is going to get anywhere.
As opposed to this, which is gonna take off, right?
Well, they think this one will have more traction than the other one. It's a political struggle. It's an uphill battle. Because you can't be naive enough to think that just because you call labor rights and civil rights, that people are going to say, oh, that's okay with me. The same forces of opposition are going to say, this is not a civil right. This is not a human right. You have the right to freedom of association, but you shouldn't have laws that protect laws that protect labor unions. You get into trouble because of that. I mean, you take a look at publications by the Cato Institute. Right to work laws, liberty, prosperity, and quality of life. And other publications that basically say, you shouldn't have the National Labor Relations Act. It provides too much protection to unions. It should basically be a free market thing. Yes?
I don't understand how, if you have the right to free association, which obviously is deemed by the Constitution, you cannot have a right to unionize, which is merely to form an association in which the members say, we will do X.
Do we really have a right of free
Now, whether or
association?
not you have a right to strike, that would partly depend on whether it's public or private.
Do we have a permit for this room right now? Do we have a permit for this room? Because if we don't, we are technically in violation of a demonstration without a permit. So the right to associate is within constraints, and they can apply those constraints. You know, if they want 4 people walking down the street, it could be an unlawful demonstration. So,
It rubs up against other rights. It rubs up against property rights. If this were a business, and I own this business, and you came in here to have a meeting, I have a right to throw everybody out of here.
Yes, but if I'm a worker, I have property rights too.
Where?
My salary, my income.
If I decide I want to terminate you, what right do you have to your salary?
That's your property rights trumping my property rights.
You got it.
But then it's not a right. I mean, I think
That's
the
right.
Supreme Court talks about employee at will as you can be fired for good reason, bad reason, or no reason at all.
That's right.
And I think that that's really what right to work is about, not about, you know,
Yeah. I want to get to the end of this, so I want to leave some time for questions, but it's an interesting read. It also has some interesting data in it as well. It does a pretty good job of reviewing the literature. But their proposal would allow for injunctive relief and compensatory and punitive damages, plus back pay, reinstatement, and legal fees and costs. So when we look at union security versus right to work, which is really at the forefront of debate in Michigan today, what is union security, why union security, pros and cons, then look at the right to work states. The closed shop requires union membership as a condition of employment. This is illegal. The National Labor Relations Act allows a union shop, an agency shop, a fair share fee, a dues checkoff. A dues checkoff allows an employer to collect the dues on behalf of the members. Why we have this proposition in Michigan today on the ballot is because the legislature passed a law saying that the teachers' unions can't have dues checkoffs as part of their agreements with management. They pushed very hard for this constitutional amendment, and they were instrumental in drafting the language to it and pursuing the litigation and other hurdles that they had to go through in order to get it on the ballot. But why union security? These are some of the arguments. Prevent free riding, stabilize labor management relations, facilitate management, and raise living standards. Facilitate management, you
yes
say,
indeed.
how would it facilitate management? You know, Ford asked for union security agreements. Go ahead.
Because the alternative is like the IWW, that the struggle never ends, that every day brings a new fight, and this at least gives you 1 year, 2 years, 3 years where you're not supposed to.
You can deal with one union versus 100 employees that are split into 6 factions. That's basically the argument for union security. But it has over time, Lincoln, had the same thing. We've debated, it's almost like Gersham's law, we've debated and tuggled and struggled, and we've switched coats in this debate. Now it's hard to recognize the truth. I mean, you would think if you believe everything that's said by some, that unions are absolutely beastly. Pros and cons. The cons: protect your right of non-association, attract more investment, create jobs, raise personal income, raise GDP, raise productivity. Most of the evidence, the good scholarly evidence that has been produced would say that the absence of a right-to-work law, or not having one, raises wages, improves benefits, improves health and safety, raises consumer demand, and it doesn't adversely affect investment to create jobs. That's what most of the evidence would say. But it's a vitriolic debate, a lot of misinformation. Gersham's law, bad information chases out good, is very relevant in this case. But I thought you might find this interesting about some competing viewpoints on right to work. In the late 1940s, Hubert Humphrey gave his maiden speeches in the Senate on labor law. He actually compiled in a very interesting document on just his speeches on this topic and debates in the Senate. But he said the following: to those who advocate right to work, remember this was in the late 1940s, right after right to work was passed, 14B of the 47 Taft-Hartley Act. Many cloak themselves with the noble, attractive slogan of right to work. I know of nothing more revoltingly sanctimonious on the American scene. Are they prepared to lay down a great national policy not only of right to work, but of jobs on which to work? Well, they've already answered that question. The economist Hayek said, no, we're not prepared to say that. We don't want it to go that far. This is the Republican GOP platform this year. Ultimately, we support the enactment of a national right to work law to promote worker freedom and to promote greater economic opportunity. That is the debate that we see today going on in Michigan. Here's a list of the right to work states and their rate of unionization. Most of them are substantially less than the national average, which is quite low. By the way, Indiana got a lot of attention as a passing right to work law. It was a right to work state before.
Until 1994.
Yeah, it passed its right to work, I think, in the late 50s. But Michigan proposed an amendment that you have a copy of it in front of you. The people should have the rights to organize, form, join, or assist, etc. And going to, really the genesis behind this whole debate is the role of unions in politics. There's an argument they spend too much. On the pro side of unions in politics, it's that if they are a countervailing voice, they're a collective strength, and the economy is so regulated that you can't separate really what happens in the public sector in terms of determining economic policy, Social Security, Medicare, from what goes on at the collective bargaining table. On the con side, that it bridges through compulsory dues, freedom of speech, undue influence, and that some argue, even though union supporters have historically argued that it's unwise. You should focus on organizing other things. You shouldn't pay any attention to politics. Union political spending and perspective, I throw some numbers out there. You can see how much does labor spend. The Wall Street Journal reported recently that labor spends 4 times as much than popularly believed. Well, they've never read anything in the literature about unions and politics. Never. But electoral and federal, these are in billions. This is 1.4 billion. This is how much, this is 2012 election cycle. This is how much business has contributed through PACs and individuals associated with businesses. about $1.3 billion. Labor is down here, 58 billion. Contributions in state elections in 2010. Total contributions, business, labor, ideological, et cetera, 3.5 billion. Labor share of that, 266 million. Lobbying, over the 1998-2012 time period, health groups spent on lobbying in Washington, $5 billion. Almost the same much by finance groups. You have 3.8 by energy groups, and labor spent about 500 million over this 13-year time period, 14-year time period. And how much do unions spend on politics? It's argued that they spend all their money on politics. No other organization in the United States has to report how much it spends on politics internally. Unions do. International unions spent $7 billion in 2011. A very small part of which, about 334 million, went to politics. Regionals spent a little bit over, close to $3 billion, a little bit over $2 billion in total, $2.5 billion in total. A very small, $94 million on politics. And here at the locals, you see that they spent $9 billion and probably about 150 million on politics. So it's a very small amount of their total spend. So what's at stake in this debate? Worker rights and protections, the future direction of the economy, the political voice. This is a very, very important issue, and I thank you for the opportunity to talk today, and be happy to take any questions, comments. I know I can stay afterwards and talk if you'd like. Thank you.
Since we have so little time left, would anybody other than the members who've already engaged, Marick, do you have any questions to ask?
Yes, sir.
Under the law that that book is proposing, does it provide a private right to action where, you know, a private citizen could pursue the matter in the courts?
Mm-hmm.
It does. Okay.
Yes. That's in fact the genesis behind it.
Okay.
That an individual, just like in civil rights, could pursue it. You can in labor organizations. Yes.
The main reason I'm here is it caught my attention because at work, I was brought into the office saying that because I said the word union, it was derogatory and offensive and it should not be used in this company. And as a big organization as it is, I really felt I was violated. Was there anything I could have done? I looked up the National Labor Relations Board. I went to, I looked and researched what I could possibly do to fix that because I really felt taken advantage of. And I don't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. If you're not in a union, would the National Labor Relations Board help you? I guess that would be.
I would suggest you hook up with Amy after this and talk to her. She's been in that situation.
Right.
And what I would simply say is a lot of it depends on a lot of it depends on how much risk you're willing to take. Yes.
Hi, I just wanted to introduce myself really quick. My name is Carissa Lewis. I actually work with Protect Working Families, and so that's the Protect Our Jobs campaign. And this is my colleague Nicole. I'm in charge of doing constituency outreach for young adults. And so if anyone is interested in learning more about our campaign or anything like that, I have some materials here. I have some volunteer sign up stuff. If you would like to support the campaign and would like some signs to hang in your office or your yard, then speak to me after.
If you could make me a young adult again, I'd be happy.
So we limited signs and all sorts of.
Yeah, we have some general ones too. So any support we can get, we would love to have. So.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate that very much. Very good.
I have one other quick question.
Yes, we have one other question, Frank, and then I'll get to
The teachers unions in Chicago, what was their successes or failures in organizing the charter schools that were popping up?
You know, I don't know the answer to that question. Do you?
Part of the thing that makes it a difficult answer is, this was a dissident group within the union that just won the union offices. And so you have to watch out who they is, that is, this current leadership got elected on the basis that they were going to fight for a better contract. And so I can get you all their literature.
But success in organizing charter schools, we don't
You know,
really have.
I don't
any.
know, but you could probably, if you email me, you got my email address on that, I'll see if I can get that
That would be
information
great.
for you.
Thank you.
Frank, did you have something we probably should?
Just a comment, you know, ultimately the argument about unions and the workplace, and public sector and private sector and all this other information, it's not about wages, benefits, or anything else. It's about who controls the quote-unquote job, okay? And right now, for example, at Wayne State University, as we are becoming a corporate university, we're trying to say who can be hired and fired, when, where, and how. It's not about wages, it's not about benefits, it's not about any of this other stuff. It's about who controls the workplace. It's always been that way since Ruther's Day and beyond, since the pact of 1955 with GM and everything. They want to be able to have a team, a slew of obedient robots who they can do anything to hire you, fire you, get rid of you. Goodbye. You're out on the street. So also one of the problems is that there's nobody here in this room who's middle class. But everybody, I teach for the labor studies program here at Wayne. If I ask you, how many people are middle class? Bullshit. You are only middle class if you are not working for wages. If you are working for wages, if you are working for somebody else, an institution, a business, whatever, you are working class. And as soon as we can get people to understand that, then you won't see on the side of, we were at the Labor Day parade at some local 245, proud to be members of the middle class. You'll never be middle class. So, there you go.
Thank you,
That's my 2
Frank.
cents.
Anything else? Thanks for coming, folks. Appreciate it very much.
I enjoyed this. This is exactly what I need.